In the late 19th century, Egypt was in a precarious situation. The country had nominal autonomy under the Ottoman Empire, but was increasingly influenced by European powers, especially Britain and France. This external influence grew in the mid-19th century, particularly after the construction of the Suez Canal. The canal was a vital link between Europe and its colonies in Asia, and both Britain and France held significant financial stakes in the canal. Egypt's ruling elite, under Ismail Pasha, embarked on ambitious modernization projects that were financed through extensive borrowing from European banks. This resulted in heavy debt and increasing European interference in Egyptian affairs. This fueled resentment among Egyptians, particularly the emerging middle class and military. The nationalist movement in Egypt found a prominent leader, Colonel Ahmad Urabi, who was an officer in the Egyptian army. Urabi was part of a rising class of Egyptian officers who were increasingly frustrated with the dominance of foreign-born officers, the influence of European powers, and the exclusion of native Egyptians from high-ranking positions. Urabi and his followers launched a rebellion with the slogan, "Egypt for the Egyptians." The movement sought to reduce foreign influence, reform the military, and establish a constitutional government that would better represent the interests of Egyptians. By 1882, Urabi had become a powerful figure. Urabi's rise to power alarmed both Britain and France, who feared that his nationalist government might jeopardize their economic interests, particularly in the Suez Canal. On the 20th of May, 1882, a combined Franco-British fleet arrived at Alexandria. At the same time, Egyptian troops were reinforcing the city's coastal defenses in anticipation of an attack. These events triggered violent riots, with loss of life on both sides. Britain, interpreting this as a sign of growing instability, decided to take direct military action, whereas France, dealing with internal issues, opted to withdraw from the situation. An ultimatum was sent to the Egyptian government demanding they order Urabi's officers in Alexandria to dismantle their coastal defense batteries. The Egyptian government refused. When the ultimatum was ignored, Admiral Seymour gave the order for the Royal Navy to bombard the Egyptian gun emplacements at Alexandria. The coastal defences returned fire soon after, with minimal effect and minimal casualties to the British fleet. No British ships were sunk. On the 13th of July, a large British force landed next to the city. They attacked, but were met with Egyptian resistance. Despite heavy resistance from the garrison for several hours, the overwhelming firepower of the British forces eventually forced the Egyptian troops to withdraw from the city. Soon after the British took Alexandria, Lieutenant General Garnet Wolseley arrived with the main British force. This was a force of over 13,000 men, including cavalry and artillery. When Wolseley arrived at Alexandria, he immediately began to organize the movement of troops through the Suez Canal to Ismailia. This was accomplished so quickly that Ismailia was occupied a few days later without resistance. A small force was then pushed along the Sweetwater Canal to the Kassassin Lock, arriving on the 26th of August. Urabi attempted to repel the advance and attacked the British forces. The British troops were caught by surprise, as they did not expect an attack. Fighting was intense, but the two British battalions, with their 4 artillery pieces, held their position. The British heavy cavalry who were camped nearby rode out to help their British comrades. When the cavalry arrived, the British went on to the offensive, causing heavy casualties on the Egyptians, which forced them to retreat. Urabi had redeployed to defend Cairo against Wolseley. His main force of 18,000 men took up defensive positions at Tel el-Kebir. Urabi's forces possessed 60 pieces of artillery and breech-loading rifles. Wolseley made several personal reconnaissances and determined that the Egyptians did not man outposts in front of their main defences at night, which made it possible for an attacking force to approach the defences under cover of darkness. Rather than make an outflanking movement around Urabi's entrenchments, which would involve a long march through the waterless desert, or undertake formal bombardment and assault, Wolseley planned to approach the position by night and attack frontally at dawn, hoping to achieve a surprise attack. Wolseley began his advance from Ismailia on the night of the 12th of September with 2 infantry divisions and a cavalry brigade. A brigade of Indian troops covered the flank. In the early morning, as the sun was rising, Wolseley's troops were 600 yards from the Egyptians. The Egyptians saw the British coming and opened fire. The British knew that their best bet to overrun the Egyptian defensive position was to storm their position and try to overrun them as quickly as possible. British troops charged with the bayonet. Most of the Egyptian soldiers were tired from having stood on the alert all night. Because of the haste with which Urabi's forces had prepared their defences, there were no obstacles in front of them to disrupt the attackers. the Egyptians were quickly overwhelmed. In the end, it was a crushing defeat for the Egyptians. British cavalry pursued the broken enemy towards Cairo. The battle was swift and decisive. The British forces suffered relatively light casualties, with around 57 soldiers killed and about 380 wounded. In contrast, the Egyptian forces sustained much heavier losses. Estimates vary, but it is believed that between 2,000 and 2,500 Egyptian soldiers were killed, with many more wounded or taken prisoner. The defeat at Tel el-Kebir effectively ended the Egyptian resistance to British intervention. Following the battle, Urabi fled, but he was later captured by the British. He was tried for treason and exiled to Sri Lanka. Britain maintained a military and political presence in Egypt for decades, consolidating its control over the Suez Canal, which was vital to British colonial interests in India and the Far East. The victory at Tel el-Kebir also marked the beginning of a long period of British occupation, which lasted until Egypt gained partial independence in the 1920s, although full sovereignty was only achieved after World War II.